The sound was a wet, solid crack. It was the sound of bones striking metal, followed by the thin, sharp cry of a girl trying to be brave. Then came a different sound, a guttural bark that ripped through the placid afternoon air of the high school parking lot. It was a sound of pure, protective fury. Julian Croft shoved Sarah Clark against the side of the car again, her head bouncing off the window with a dull thud. His face, usually a mask of privileged indifference, was twisted into a snarl. "You don't say no to me," he hissed, his breath hot and foul against her cheek. Around them, a circle of students had formed. Phones were out, small red lights blinking, recording every second. No one moved to help. No one spoke a word. They were spectators at an execution of dignity, their silence a form of applause for the son of the man who owned their town. From the passenger side of an old, dusty Ford pickup truck, a blur of black and tan fur exploded. The window was cracked just enough. A 70-pound German shepherd, propelled by a loyalty forged in the dust of forgotten wars, squeezed through the opening and hit the asphalt running. The dog's name was Max. He launched himself at Julian, his teeth finding their mark in the soft flesh of the boy's forearm. Julian screamed, a sound of shock and outrage rather than real pain. He shook his arm violently, but Max held on, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Get it off me!" Julian shrieked. He drew back his leg, his expensive leather loafer aimed at the dog's side. The first kick landed with a sickening thud. Max grunted, his grip faltering for a second. The second kick was harder, more vicious. It connected with the dog's ribs, and this time, Max let out a sharp, piercing yelp of agony. He released his hold and stumbled back, his breathing suddenly shallow and ragged. He tried to stand, to place himself between the boy and the girl, but his back legs gave out. He collapsed onto the hot pavement, whimpering. Julian turned his attention back to Sarah, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Now your mutt is broken too." That was when a man appeared. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved with a heavy, deliberate calm that was more menacing than any outburst of rage. He was tall, with the broad shoulders of a man who had carried heavy things for a long time. His hair was short. His face was etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and sun-baked landscapes. He wore simple jeans and a plain gray shirt, but he moved with an economy of motion that was anything but simple. This was John Creed, former Master Chief, United States Navy SEALs, and he had just heard his dog cry out in pain. He had been inside, a rare visit to the school to speak with a counselor about Sarah's future, about college applications. A promise he had made to her father, a man who now rested beneath a marble stone in Arlington. A promise to look after his little girl. John's eyes took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. The circle of silent observers, the smirking bully, the terrified girl pressed against the car, and his dog, his partner, struggling for breath on the ground. A profound and terrible stillness settled over him. It was a feeling he knew well. The cold, clear focus that came before the violence. He did not look at the other students. They were ghosts, irrelevant. He fixed his gaze on Julian Croft. "Let go of her," John said. His voice was not loud. It was a low, flat command that cut through the air and seemed to drop the temperature by several degrees. Julian, emboldened by his audience and his father's name, scoffed. "Or what, old man? You gonna call the cops?" John did not answer with words. He closed the remaining distance in 2 silent strides. His hand came up, not in a fist, but with an open palm. He did not grab or strike. He simply cupped the back of Julian's hand. his thumb pressing into a nerve cluster at the base of the boy's wrist. There was no struggle. Julian's fingers unspooled from Sarah's arm as if they had their own mind. A jolt of white-hot electric pain shot up his arm. Julian gasped, his eyes wide with a surprise that quickly curdled into fear. He had never felt pain like this, so precise, so debilitating. John applied a fraction more pressure, and Julian's knees buckled. He was forced down, away from Sarah, his posture broken. John held him there for a moment, letting the lesson sink in. He looked into the boy's eyes and saw not a tough guy, but a spoiled child who had never been denied anything. "You will not touch her again," John stated. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, like announcing the time of day. He released his grip. Julian stumbled back, cradling his hand, his face a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. He looked at John, then at the still filming phones, and his bravado returned, thin and brittle. "You're dead," he spat. "My father will ruin you." John ignored him. He turned his back on the boy, an act of dismissal more profound than any insult. He walked to Sarah, who was leaning against the car, her body trembling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice now gentle. She shook her head, unable to speak, tears finally tracing paths through the grime on her face. John's gaze then fell to Max. He knelt beside the dog, his large hand running gently over the shepherd's flank. Max whimpered and licked his hand, his tail giving a weak, pained thump against the asphalt. John could feel the unnatural give of the ribs beneath his fingers. A quiet, controlled rage, cold as glacial ice, began to build in his chest. He looked from his wounded dog to the frightened girl who was his sworn responsibility. He saw the ghost of her father, his teammate, his brother, standing behind her. He had made a promise over a flag-draped casket, a promise to protect. He stood up and faced Sarah, his eyes meeting hers. He saw her fear, her shame, her feeling of utter helplessness. "This ends," he said, his voice low and absolute. "Right now, this ends. I promise you." Sarah looked at this quiet, haunted man who had been a ghost in her life for years, a distant figure of duty. For the first time, she saw the warrior beneath the surface. She saw the promise in his eyes, and a tiny, flickering ember of hope ignited in the cold darkness of her fear. She nodded, a single, shaky motion. John helped her into the truck, then carefully lifted the 70-pound dog into the back seat, laying him gently on a blanket. He closed the doors, the sounds of the dispersing crowd and Julian's muttered threats fading into the background. They were just noise now. The signal had been received. The mission had begun. That evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Max lay on a soft bed by the fireplace, his breathing shallow. The vet had confirmed 2 broken ribs and severe bruising. He was on pain medication, his eyes glassy and distant. Sarah was in her room, the door closed. John knew she was not sleeping. She was replaying the day's humiliation, the feeling of powerlessness. The landline phone rang, its shrill cry an intrusion into the wounded silence. John knew who it would be. He picked up the receiver. "This is Creed." The voice on the other end was smooth, accustomed to command. It dripped with condescension. "Mr. Creed, this is Richard Croft. I believe your ward and my son had a misunderstanding today." "There was no misunderstanding," John said, his voice flat. A sigh. "Look, I understand you're protective. Let's be adults. Boys will be boys. Julian can be impetuous. I'm prepared to be generous to make this all go away. Let's say $50,000 for the girl's therapy, the dog's vet bills, whatever you need. A fresh start somewhere else. The silence from John's end stretched. Everyone has a price, Mr. Creed, Croft said, a note of impatience in his voice. Name yours. John looked over at Max, who let out a soft whimper in his sleep. He thought of Sarah, locked in her room. He thought of her father, bleeding out in the Afghan dirt. His last words a plea. Watch over her, Johnny. There's a difference between a man who has a price and a man who has a cost, John said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. You can't afford the cost. Croft laughed, a short, ugly bark. You have no idea what you are starting. I own this town. The police, the school, the council. You are a ghost. I will erase you. You do not want this war, Mr. Croft, John replied, the words precise and cold. You think you're a predator, but you've only ever hunted livestock. You just put your hands on a lion's cub. Now the lion is at your door. He hung up the phone. The click of the receiver echoed in the silent house. It was a declaration. The lines were drawn. Richard Croft had his money, his influence, his network of corrupt sycophants. John Creed had a promise. The next morning, John drove Sarah and a heavily sedated Max to the town police station. The building was small, brick, with a perpetually faded flag hanging limply from a pole out front. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of old coffee and bureaucratic indifference. The desk sergeant, a portly man named Henderson with a name tag that seemed too tight for his uniform, barely looked up from his newspaper. John laid out the facts, calmly, precisely, the assault, the witnesses, the injury to his dog. Henderson listened with a practiced, weary patience. When John finished, the sergeant took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Look, he said, his tone dismissive. It's a high school spat. Julian Croft and the Clark girl, they've had drama before. He's a hothead. She's sensitive. He glanced at Sarah, who shrank under his gaze. You file a report. It's his word against hers. The other kids, they won't talk. Not against a Croft. My dog was injured, John stated. There are vet bills. Animal control issue, Henderson said, waving a hand. And you admit the dog bit him first. In this state, that gives him the right to defend himself. Honestly, Mr. Creed, you're lucky he's not pressing charges to have the animal put down. The threat hung in the air, thick and intentional. John's jaw tightened. He saw the calculus in the sergeant's eyes. The name Croft outweighed justice every time. So you're not going to do anything, John said. It wasn't a question. There's nothing to be done, Henderson confirmed, turning back to his paper. The conversation was over. The visit to the school principal was even worse. Principal Matthews, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically removed and replaced with gelatin, wrung his hands. John, I understand your concern, he began, calling John by his first name as if they were old friends. But we have a dozen student accounts, and well, the consensus is that Sarah was confrontational, and your dog's presence on school property is a serious violation. Julian Croft assaulted her, John said, his voice dangerously quiet. Julian claims she slapped him first, Matthews countered, avoiding eye contact. In light of the disruption, and to let things cool down, I'm suspending Sarah for 3 days. John stared at the principal, a long, unblinking stare that made the man visibly sweat. He saw the truth. The Croft family was a major donor to the school's new athletic complex. The plaque was already ordered. They left without another word. The system was not broken. It was working exactly as designed. It was a closed loop, sealed tight by Richard Croft's money and influence. That night, the harassment began. It started online. A new, anonymous social media account posted a picture of Sarah from the incident, her face streaked with tears. The caption read, "Crazy girl and her vicious dog attack local honor student." Then came the comments. A torrent of digital venom from fake profiles and anonymous accounts, calling her names, slut-shaming her, mocking her. Then it got personal. A photo appeared on the same account. It was of John's house, taken from the woods that bordered his property. It was a nighttime shot, a light on in the living room window. The caption was simple, "We see you." Sarah saw it on her phone and her face went white. She showed it to John. He looked at the image, his eyes scanning the tree line, calculating angles, distances. They were being watched. He walked to the window and drew the curtains. He checked the locks on the doors, his movements efficient and methodical. He was no longer just a guardian. He was a security specialist. This was his trade. The next night, a rock shattered the living room window. Wrapped around it was a note printed in block letters. "Leave town or the next one goes through the girl." John found Sarah huddled in her room, crying silently. Max was at her side, his head on her lap, whining softly, as if he understood her pain. John swept up the glass, his face a granite mask. He boarded the window with a piece of plywood. The house was no longer a home. It was a hard target. He knew then that a defensive posture was a losing strategy. You can't win a war by building higher walls. You win by taking the fight to the enemy. The final straw came 2 days later. Julian Croft and 2 of his friends, large boys from the football team, found Sarah's best friend, a quiet girl named Amy, as she was walking home from the library. They didn't beat her. It was more insidious than that. They cornered her, crowded her, their physical presence an overwhelming threat. Julian grabbed her backpack and emptied it onto the sidewalk, her books and papers scattering in the wind. "Tell your friend Sarah to drop it," Julian said, his voice casual, which made it all the more terrifying. "Tell her this is just a warning. We know where you live too." Amy ran home, hysterical. Her parents, terrified, called Sarah's house and told her that Amy could no longer see her. It was too dangerous. John listened to Sarah's side of the conversation, watched her face crumble as she lost her only friend. He saw the strategy: isolation. Croft was cutting her off from her support system, making her an island. When she hung up the phone, she looked at him, her eyes hollow. "They're going to keep doing this, aren't they?" she whispered. "They won't ever stop." "No," John said. "They won't." He paused. "But neither will we." That night, after Sarah had fallen into an exhausted sleep, John went to his study. It was a small, sparse room. On the wall was a single framed photograph. A group of 10 men in desert camouflage, grinning at the camera, their faces young and invincible. 9 of them were gone now. Only John remained. He opened a locked footlocker in the corner. Inside, nestled in foam, was a satellite phone. He hadn't used it in years. He powered it on. It took a moment to acquire a signal, connecting him to a world far from this quiet, corrupt town. He dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "Yeah." The voice was sharp, alert. "Ghost, it's John." There was a pause, then a shift in tone. "Chief, it's been a while. You good?" The call sign came naturally, a relic of a life he thought he'd left behind. "I need a favor," John said, and in the clipped, precise language of his former profession, he laid out the situation. The girl, the father, the promise, the bully, the corrupt town. He didn't ask for help. He stated the need. In their world, that was enough. Ghost was quiet for a long moment when John finished. So, local tyrant, corrupt PD, intimidation tactics. Standard playbook for rich cowards. Standard playbook, John confirmed. What's the objective? Ghost asked. It was always about the objective. Justice, John said. Total, unequivocal. I like that objective, Ghost replied. Consider it a team exercise. I'll be there in 24, and I'm bringing Tank. He's been bored. Says civilian life lacks percussive maintenance. Good, John said. Bring the kit. Full spectrum. You got it, Chief. We're coming in dark. The line went dead. John put the phone away. A weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lifted slightly. The team. He wasn't alone anymore. The odds had just begun to shift. His next move was research. He spent hours on his laptop, digging into the town's archives, a digital reconnaissance of the battlefield. He searched for one name, Croft. He found zoning variances, dismissed lawsuits, and puff pieces in the local paper. But he also found a recurring thread of dissent. A series of articles, sharp and well-researched, that questioned the Croft family's meteoric rise. They were all written by the same person, Maria Flores. He found her contact information. She worked for a small, independent online news outlet, the kind that ran on passion and fumes. He sent her a short, encrypted email. I have information about the Croft family. Verifiable. Meet me, public place, your choice. She replied in under an hour. Library Cafe, tomorrow, 10 a.m., come alone. The final piece was the law. He knew the local system was compromised. He needed a lawyer from outside that system, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. He made one more call, this time on his regular cell phone. Carter Law Offices. Ben, it's John Creed. There was a sound of a chair leaning back. Well, I'll be damned. Master Chief, thought you'd fallen off the earth. What can I do for the Navy's finest? Ben Carter was former JAG. They had served together in a place where the law was often written in sand and blood. He was sharp, aggressive, and owed John a debt from a bad situation in Kandahar. John explained the legal side of the problem, the stonewalling police, the complicit school. Classic rich guy blockade, Ben said, his voice tightening. They think the rules don't apply. I hate that. I need a pit bull, Ben, someone to handle the paperwork and file the motions when the time comes. Consider it done, Ben said without hesitation. Pro bono. That debt I owe you? This squares it. Send me everything you have. We'll build a case so airtight they'll suffocate. John hung up. The pieces were moving. The network of the righteous was beginning to form. He looked out the boarded-up window into the darkness. Richard Croft had his town. John Creed had his team. The war was about to begin in earnest. He met Maria Flores the next morning. She was younger than he expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She watched him approach with a journalist's skepticism. "You're the one who emailed me," she said, not as a question. "I am," John said, sitting down. "You said you have information on the Crofts." "I have a victim," John corrected her gently. "And I have a witness." He nodded toward the entrance of the library. Sarah stood there, hesitant, holding Max's leash. The dog sat calmly at her side, his gaze alert. Maria's professional mask softened as she looked at Sarah. She saw the fear, but also a glimmer of resolve. I've been trying to get someone to go on the record about Julian Croft for years, she said quietly. No one ever would. The settlements, the non-disclosure agreements, their parents were too scared. We're not taking a settlement, John said, and we're not signing anything. Maria pulled out a digital recorder. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Sarah spoke. Her voice was quiet at first, shaky, but it grew stronger as she recounted not just the assault in the parking lot, but a dozen smaller incidents of harassment and intimidation that had led up to it. John sat beside her, a silent, solid presence that gave her strength. Max rested his head on her knee. When she was finished, Maria turned off the recorder. Her eyes were hard. This is the one, she said. This is the case that breaks them open. She opened her laptop and showed them a file. It was a list of names. Girls. 6 of them, each one followed by a date and a notation. Settlement paid by Croft Enterprises. These are the other victims I know about, Maria said. I've tried to contact them. Their families are terrified. Richard Croft threatened to ruin them, and he has the power to do it. People are brave when they're not alone, John said. We need to give them a reason to feel safe. That afternoon, Ghost and Tank arrived. They didn't come in a flashy car. They drove a nondescript plumbing van, the kind no one looks at twice. Ghost was lean and wiry, his fingers always moving, as if typing on an invisible keyboard. Tank was a mountain of a man with a shaved head and a deceptively calm demeanor. They brought bags of equipment. Not weapons, but tools of a different kind of warfare. Miniature cameras, audio bugs, frequency scanners, encrypted laptops. House is compromised, John told them, pointing to the boarded window. They're watching us. Ghost grinned. Amateurs. Let's see who's watching who. Within an hour, John's small house was transformed into a command center. Ghost swept for bugs, finding 2 cheap listening devices, one in a phone line, another stuck under the porch. He disabled them and replaced them with his own devices, designed to feed back a loop of harmless ambient noise. He deployed micro-drones, no bigger than dragonflies, to establish a perimeter around the property, feeding live video to a tablet. Tank, meanwhile, reinforced the doors and windows with unobtrusive, high-strength composite materials. Let them throw another rock, he grunted. They'll break their arm. With the house secured, the next phase began. John, Maria, and Sarah started reaching out to the other girls on the list. It was slow, painstaking work. The first few calls ended with panicked hang-ups. The fear Richard Croft had instilled was deep and pervasive. But Maria was persistent, and John's presence offered a new variable. He spoke to one of the fathers, an accountant whose small business had been mysteriously audited into bankruptcy after he'd tried to complain about Julian. I can't, the man said, his voice full of shame. He'll come after us again. He's coming after all of us, John replied. He only wins if we fight him one by one. Together, we're not a target. We're an army. Slowly, cautiously, one of the girls agreed to talk. Her name was Emily. Julian had cornered her a year ago. The incident hushed up with a check that barely covered her family's legal fees to sign the NDA. Her story was sickeningly similar to Sarah's. Her testimony, given to Maria and recorded, became the second pillar of their case. The Crofts felt the shift. They didn't know the specifics, but they sensed their control slipping. The silence they had bought was being broken. They decided to escalate. They decided to deliver a final, brutal message. The attack came without warning. Sarah had insisted on trying to maintain some normalcy, to walk Max along the quiet dirt road that led to their house, just as she did every evening. John had been against it, but she had been adamant. "I can't live in a box," she'd said. He'd relented, but he watched from the porch, one of Ghost's drones hovering silently high above. A black SUV, the same one they had seen lurking near the house, came speeding down the road. It screeched to a halt, blocking Sarah's path. Julian Croft got out of the passenger seat. Two of his large friends got out of the back. John was already moving. "Tank, with me! Ghost, record everything!" But they were too far away. "You should have taken the money," Julian snarled at Sarah, advancing on her. Max, despite his healing ribs, immediately placed himself in front of her, a deep growl tearing from his throat. He was ready to die for her. "Stupid dog," one of the thugs said, and kicked Max hard, sending him tumbling into the ditch. Sarah screamed and lunged, not at Julian, but at the boy who had kicked her dog. She raked her fingernails down his face, a primal, furious act of defiance. Julian grabbed her from behind, spinning her around. He didn't say another word. He just started hitting her. His fists rained down on her, brutal, ugly, targeted blows. She crumpled to the ground, trying to curl into a ball. He kicked her once, hard, in the side. Then he stood over her, breathing heavily. "It's over," he said to her unconscious form. "You lose." They got back in the SUV and sped away just as John and Tank came sprinting around the bend in the road. John saw her first, a small, broken shape lying in the dirt. He saw the unnatural angle of her arm, the blood matting her hair. For a moment, the world went silent. The sounds of his own harsh breathing, the approaching footsteps of Tank, the distant whine of the drone, it all vanished. There was only the sight of the girl, his promise. Lying broken in a ditch, he knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he checked for a pulse. It was there, thready but present. From the ditch, a wounded cry. Max was crawling toward Sarah, dragging his back legs, trying to get to her, to protect her even now. The cold rage inside John, the rage he had held in check for weeks, for years, finally broke its leash. It was not a hot, fiery anger. It was a cold, absolute certainty, a glacier of wrath that would grind mountains to dust. Tank put a hand on his shoulder. "John, we need to get her to a hospital." John nodded, his movements stiff, robotic. He gently gathered Sarah into his arms, her head lolled against his chest. He looked at her bruised and swollen face, and the last vestiges of his restraint evaporated. He looked at Tank, his eyes like chips of flint. "The book is closed," he said, his voice a low rasp. "The rules are gone. We're ending this, tonight." In the sterile, white waiting room of the hospital, the fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous, indifferent tune. Sarah was in surgery for a broken arm and a concussion. A doctor had already come out to tell them she would be okay, but the words felt hollow. John had seen okay before. He knew the wounds that didn't show up on an X-ray, the scars that formed on the soul. Tank stood by the window, a silent, imposing sentinel. Ghost sat in a chair, his laptop open, his fingers flying across the keyboard in a silent fury. "The drone got it all," Ghost said, not looking up. "Crystal clear video. Audio is a little windy, but you can hear everything Julian said. We have the assault. We have the license plate." "It's not enough," John said, his voice rough. He was staring at a blank wall, but he was seeing Sarah's face. "A video can be disputed. Lawyers can tie it up for years. He'll claim self-defense. He'll say she attacked him. They'll bury us in paperwork until we run out of money and will." "What's the play, Chief?" Tank asked, turning from the window. John finally looked at them. The grief in his eyes was ancient, But beneath it was a new and terrible fire. They believe they are untouchable because they control the system. The law, the money, the media. We're not going to fight them inside their system anymore. We're going to burn the system down around them. He turned to Ghost. The SUV, you have the plate? Of course, Ghost said. Registered to a shell corporation owned by Croft Enterprises. I need everything, John said. The corporation's financials, Richard Croft's personal accounts. I want to know every dollar he's paid to Henderson at the police department. Every donation he's made to Principal Matthews. Every judge he's played golf with. Find the rot. All of it. Ghost's lips curved into a thin, grim smile. That's not a favor, Chief. That's a pleasure. Ben Carter, John said, pulling out his phone. He called the lawyer. Ben, it's escalated. Sarah's in the hospital. He gave him the brief, brutal summary. Those sons of bitches, Ben swore. I'm filing an emergency injunction right now. No, John said. Not yet. Don't file anything. Don't tip our hand. I need you to do something else. There's an emergency town council meeting tomorrow night. It was already scheduled, something about zoning. I need you to get us on the agenda. A matter of urgent public safety. 10 minutes. Can you do it? I can do it, Ben said, his voice tight with anger. But what are we going to do in 10 minutes? We're going to hold a trial, John said, and we're going to deliver a verdict. The next 24 hours were a blur of focused activity. While Tank stayed at the hospital, a visible deterrent to any further action, John and Ghost worked from the house. Ghost, fueled by coffee and a cold sense of purpose, delved into the digital lifeblood of the Croft Empire. He was a virtuoso. He moved through firewalls and encryption like a phantom, leaving no trace. He found what he was looking for. A separate hidden ledger. Payments listed under cryptic codes. Community outreach to an account owned by Sergeant Henderson's wife. Educational grants to a private fund managed by Principal Matthews. A monthly consulting fee to the town's most powerful councilman. It was all there. A detailed map of the town's corruption, bankrolled by Richard Croft. He didn't just bribe them, Ghost murmured, impressed despite himself. He owns them. Mortgages, car loans, their kids' college funds. He has them in a financial stranglehold. Get it all, John said. Every last cent. Meanwhile, John made a call to Maria Flores. He put her in the hospital, Maria. We have it on video. We're making our move tomorrow night at the town council meeting. My crew will be there, she said instantly. We'll stream it live. The final piece was the most critical. Sarah had scratched the face of the thug who kicked Max. The doctor at the hospital, a sharp-eyed woman who had seen too many accidents, had carefully taken scrapings from under Sarah's fingernails before cleaning her up. Just in case, she had said, handing the sealed evidence bag to John. John called the one cop in town he had heard whispers about, a patrolman who wrote too many tickets for the sons of the wealthy, a man who was perpetually stuck on the night shift. Officer Miller, a veteran like him. They met in a deserted park. John laid out the story, showed him the video on his phone. Miller watched, his face grim. I've known the department was dirty for years, Miller said, but I never had proof that would stick. Henderson and the chief, they're in Croft's pocket. I have the proof now, John said, telling him about Ghost's findings. And I have this. He showed Miller the evidence bag. DNA from one of the attackers. Miller's eyes lit up. The state crime lab owes me a favor. I can get this expedited. If it's a match to one of Croft's known associates, and we have him on video at the scene, it's an ironclad case for assault. I need more than that, John said. Tomorrow night, at the council meeting, we are going to present all of this. Publicly. Croft will be there. His cronies will be there. When the evidence is revealed, I need you to be ready. Not just you. I need incorruptible officers, state troopers if you can get them, ready to make arrests. Plural. Miller looked at John, seeing the cold, hard certainty in his eyes. He made a decision. They're not going to know what hit them, he said. I'll make the call. The town council chamber was packed. Most were there for the zoning issue, but a buzz of anticipation filled the room. Maria Flores and her camera crew were set up in the back, their presence making the council members nervous. Richard Croft was there, sitting in the front row, looking confident and annoyed. He was there to ensure his zoning variance passed without a hitch. He saw John Creed walk in and his eyes narrowed. John was not alone. With him was Ben Carter, carrying a briefcase, and behind them, pushed in a wheelchair by Tank, was Sarah. Her arm was in a cast. Her face was a constellation of purple and yellow bruises, but her head was held high. Her eyes, when they met Julian's across the room, did not waver. The other victims, Emily and one other girl who had found her courage at the last minute, sat with them. They were a small, battered-looking group, but they radiated a quiet, formidable strength. When the council chairman called for new business, Ben Carter stood up. Mr. Chairman, we request our 10 minutes on a matter of urgent public safety. The chairman, the same man receiving a consulting fee from Croft, started to object. But Maria's camera was on him. The entire room was watching. Reluctantly, he nodded. You have 5 minutes. Ben Carter didn't go to the podium. He simply turned to face the room. We are not here to talk about zoning, he said, his voice ringing with authority. We are here to talk about the cancer that has been growing in this town. A cancer of violence, corruption, and impunity, bankrolled by one man. He pointed a finger directly at Richard Croft. Croft stood up. This is an outrage. I will not be slandered by this ambulance chaser. Then I suggest you watch this, Ben said. On a large screen behind the council dais, a screen meant for zoning maps, a video began to play. It was the drone footage. The black SUV, Julian and his friends, the brutal one-sided beating. A collective gasp went through the room. The footage was undeniable. It was raw and horrific. Richard Croft's face went from red to a pasty, sickly white. He sat down heavily. Julian looked like he was going to be sick. When the video ended, the room was utterly silent. Then Sarah spoke. Her voice, amplified by a small microphone Ben had placed in front of her, was quiet but carried to every corner of the room. My name is Sarah Clark, she said. My father was Sergeant Mark Clark. He died for this country. He died believing in a world where bullies don't win. She looked directly at Julian. You beat me. You broke my arm. You terrorized my friends. You and your father thought you could buy my silence. You thought you could scare me away. She took a shaky breath, her courage a tangible thing. But you're the one who is scared. I see it now. You're terrified of anyone who you can't buy or bully. I am not scared of you anymore, she said, her voice clear and strong, as her last word echoed in the silent chamber. The main doors swung open. Officer Miller entered, flanked by 6 imposing state troopers in full uniform. Miller walked to the front of the room. He held up a file. Richard Croft, he announced, his voice booming. You are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. 2 troopers moved to Croft, pulling his hands behind his back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Julian Croft," Miller continued, turning to the boy, who was frozen in his seat. "You are under arrest for felony assault and battery." More troopers surrounded Julian and his friends, whose faces were masks of pure terror. The DNA results had come back. It was a perfect match. Chaos erupted. The council chairman and Sergeant Henderson, who was also in the room, tried to slip out a side door, but they were met by more troopers. They too were cuffed and read their rights. John Creed watched it all, his face impassive. He had not said a word. He didn't need to. He had made a promise and he had kept it. He looked at Sarah. A single tear traced a clean path down her bruised cheek. It was a tear of relief, of release, of justice. The trials were swift. With the video evidence, the financial records Ghost had uncovered, and the public testimony of Sarah and the other girls, the Croft empire crumbled. Richard Croft, Julian, the corrupt police chief, Henderson, the councilman, they were all found guilty. The sentences were long. The untouchables had been touched. Justice, forced into the light, had been absolute. A few weeks later, as life began to find its new, quieter rhythm, a car pulled up to John's house. A woman got out. It was Julian's mother. She had been absent from the trial, a ghost in her own family's downfall. John met her on the porch. Max, now fully healed, stood at his side, watching her with intelligent, wary eyes. I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. She wouldn't meet his gaze. "I knew what Julian was, what his father encouraged. I knew, and I did nothing. I was a coward. I am so sorry for what my family did to that brave girl." John listened. He heard the sincerity in her voice, but he also heard the years of weakness that had allowed the evil to fester. He gave a single, sharp nod. He accepted the apology, but he did not offer absolution. That was not his to give. He turned and went back inside, closing the door on the ruins of the Croft family. The town, freed from its silent tyrant, began to heal. The settlement money from the lawsuit was substantial. Sarah, after a long discussion with John, decided what to do with it. John bought the adjoining 10 acres of wooded land. He built a new, state-of-the-art kennel and training facility. He put up a sign at the end of the long dirt road: Clark K-9 Services, for veterans, by veterans. He found his new purpose. It was not so different from his old one. He took in shelter dogs, dogs on the verge of being put down, and he trained them. He trained them to be service animals for veterans suffering from the same invisible wounds he carried himself. He trained dogs like Max to save men like him. The story ended not with a bang, but with a quiet evening. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. John sat on the porch swing. Sarah sat beside him, her cast long gone, the bruises faded to memory. She was reading a textbook for one of her college classes. Max, now graying around the muzzle, lay at their feet, his head resting on John's boot. In a large, fenced-in yard below the porch, a litter of German shepherd puppies tumbled and played, their happy yips filling the air. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer filled with pain or fear. It was a comfortable, peaceful quiet. It was the quiet after the storm, the quiet of a promise kept, the quiet of a life redeemed. It was the quiet of home.